They kicked me out on my 18th birthday because I was gay, but they didn't know the house they threw me out of was mine all along. That sentence didn't just change Jesse's life. It went on to echo across the internet, passed from one quiet, broken heart to another. If you've ever felt unwanted in your own home, this story is for you. Stick around. And maybe, like Jesse, you'll realize that being thrown away sometimes means being set free. Jesse had never been the kind of boy that made people proud at backyard barbecues. He wasn't loud. He wasn't athletic. He didn't chase girls or wrestle in the mud. Instead, he built custom PCs from salvage parts and stayed up late watching coding tutorials with headphones on so no one would complain about the sound. His world was quiet, like him, private, controlled, safe. After his biological father died from a sudden heart attack, Jesse's world shifted. His mother, Karen, remarried within a year to Rick, a man who brought along a teenage daughter, Ashley. From the start, Rick treated Jesse like a defective product. "Boys don't cry," he'd say with a sneer. "You're not normal, Jesse. You need to toughen up." But Jesse didn't need to be reminded. He already knew he was different. He felt it every time he avoided locker rooms, every time his voice trembled under pressure, every time he imagined a future that didn't include a wife. Jesse was gay. He'd never told anyone. But somehow, Rick always acted like he knew, like it disgusted him. Ashley didn't make life easier. Loud, flashy, and cruel in the way some teenagers are when no one tells them to stop. She thrived on attention. One week, she started a rumor at school that Jesse had touched another boy in the locker room. It was a lie, one Jesse didn't even know how to defend. The stares, the whispers, the teachers pulling him aside with that concerned but afraid expression, it all made him shrink. Jesse stopped going to lunch, stopped raising his hand, stopped believing he could trust anyone. His mother noticed none of it, or maybe she did, but chose not to care. Karen was always busy with her salon appointments, fitness classes, and weekly date nights. "Rick is doing what your father never did, raising a man," she once told Jesse when he asked why Rick was always angry with him. By the time Jesse was 17, he barely spoke at home. He moved like a ghost through the hallways, headphones in, eyes down. His bedroom, a small, windowless space in the basement, became his whole world. There, he felt safe enough to dream, safe enough to imagine a future in computer engineering, safe enough to believe that maybe, one day, someone would love him for who he was. But deep down, Jesse also knew if they ever found out, if he ever said it out loud, it would all be over. So, he stayed quiet. He carried that silence into the day of his 18th birthday. There was no celebration planned, no balloons, no cake, no dinner. Jesse didn't expect much, maybe a small text from his mom, or a lukewarm smile in the morning. Instead, he spent most of the day at school, then headed to his part-time job stocking electronics at a local tech shop. He didn't tell anyone it was his birthday. When he got home just past sunset, Rick was already waiting by the front door. He wasn't smiling. In front of him sat Jesse's suitcase. Not all his belongings, just the bare minimum. A few t-shirts, a toothbrush, his spare keyboard snapped in half. Rick didn't yell. He didn't need to. "You're 18, I'm not responsible for you anymore. Get out." Jesse blinked. Confused at first, he laughed. Then, seeing the expression on Rick's face, cold, satisfied, final, the panic hit. "What?" His phone buzzed. It was a call from Karen. When he answered, her voice was flat. "Jesse, you're gay. You don't belong in this house anymore. It's time you learned how to live like a real adult." The call ended before Jesse could speak. He stood there, trembling. No one stopped him. No one asked where he would go. And then, from behind Rick, Ashley emerged holding up her phone, recording, "Say cheese." She smirked. Later, she'd post the video on TikTok. The caption would read, "Drama queen got kicked out of his fairy tale castle." That night, Jesse stood in front of his childhood home with nowhere to go. The house was still warm with light, still smelled like dinner, but it was no longer his. He called Ryan, his only real friend. Ryan showed up in pajamas, didn't ask questions, just opened the car door. Jesse didn't remember the drive, only the silence, and how even silence could feel heavy. Ryan's apartment was cramped, 2 rooms, 3 people, no privacy. Jesse slept on the couch that first night, curled around his broken keyboard, unsure of how to breathe, let alone survive. He wasn't ready for what came next. But Jesse had no idea in the dustiest corner of his backpack, folded inside an old notebook, a letter was waiting, written years ago, by the only man who had ever truly seen him, and that letter would change everything. If this story speaks to something inside you, stay with us. Jesse's journey is only beginning. Follow Heart's story for the next chapter, where silence becomes strength, and truth takes back what was stolen. Jesse had always imagined that turning 18 would feel like a quiet kind of freedom. Maybe he'd get a small cake from the store on the way home. Maybe his mom would remember, even just with a nod or a distracted, happy birthday. Instead, he came home to Rick, the man who never saw him as anything but broken, standing outside the house, holding Jesse's life in one hand and throwing it away with the other. The sun had barely set. The pavement was still warm under Jesse's sneakers, but the chill that sank into his chest as he saw his duffel bag sitting at Rick's feet made it feel like winter. His toothbrush hung out of the zipper like a white flag. His secondhand laptop was jammed into a ripped side pocket. There wasn't even a note. Rick didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice was calm in that cruel way that made Jesse feel like he was the crazy one. "You're 18. I'm not responsible for you anymore. Go." Jesse didn't move. "Jesse." He glanced past Rick, hoping to see Karen at the window, waving him back inside, saying this was all a misunderstanding. She wasn't there. She didn't even come to the door. His phone rang. It was her. He picked up, already knowing she wouldn't be sorry. "Jesse, you're gay," she said, like it was a crime. "You don't belong in this house anymore. It's time you learned how to live like a real man." The call ended before Jesse could speak. It wasn't a conversation. It was a sentence. No trial, no defense, just exile. Behind Rick. Ashley stepped out, her phone already recording. She didn't say anything. She just smiled as she slowly tilted her camera, capturing Jesse's stunned, tear-stricken face. The glow from the porch light painted him in soft shadows. In the video, he would look almost theatrical, like a scene from a bad teen movie. The caption she would add an hour later on TikTok read, "Drama queen got kicked out of his fairy tale castle." It got more likes than Jesse ever did on any of his own posts. He stood there for minutes, maybe longer. He didn't remember. The bag felt heavy even though it barely held anything. His hands shook as he pulled out his phone. There was no one to call, no family left, no cousins close, no neighbors who would understand. Everyone had turned away slowly over the years, the way people do when your presence becomes inconvenient. Everyone, except Ryan. Ryan had been Jesse's friend since middle school. He knew how Jesse panicked in crowded rooms. He knew about the locker room rumor. He knew Jesse was gay long before Jesse had the courage to whisper it out loud, but he never made it a big deal. He just stayed. Jesse called him. The moment Ryan heard his voice, he said, "Stay where you are. I'm coming." When the car pulled up 20 minutes later, Jesse had barely moved. His legs were numb. His face felt cold and dry, like the tears had frozen on his skin. Ryan opened the door without a word. Jesse climbed in, sinking into the seat like it was the only safe place left on earth. They didn't talk on the way to Ryan's apartment. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was mercy. Ryan shared his tiny apartment with another student named Blake, who barely looked up from his laptop when they walked in. The place smelled like ramen and overused cologne. The couch Jesse collapsed onto was stained and sunken in the middle, but it was a place to rest, a place to exist. And for now, that was enough. Jesse stayed there for days, floating in a fog of shame, rage, and exhaustion. He barely slept. He didn't eat unless Ryan reminded him. Sometimes he cried without knowing why. Tears would just come, suddenly and silently, while the others pretended not to notice. His body was safe, but his mind was still locked outside the house where he'd been raised, the house that threw him out like trash. One evening, while trying to find a charger in his duffel bag, Jesse pulled out an old notebook. It was the one he used during his freshman year, filled with sketches of circuits and half-finished game ideas. Tucked between 2 pages was something he didn't remember packing, a yellowed envelope, brittle at the edges, sealed with tape that had nearly lost its stickiness. The handwriting on the front made his breath catch. "Jesse, for your 18th birthday. Love. Grandpa." His fingers trembled as he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, scrawled with shaky pen strokes. "Jesse, my boy, this house belongs to you. Your mother will keep it until the day you turn 18. I've made sure of it. I hope by then, you'll have found the courage to be exactly who you are and to protect that truth with your life. You are not wrong. You are not broken. This home is yours. Always. Love. Grandpa." Jesse read the letter 3 times. Then a fourth. His heart raced. Not with hope, but with disbelief. Could it be real? Had his grandfather, the only man who ever asked about his robotics projects, who taught him how to solder a motherboard, actually left the house to him? He needed answers. Real ones. There was only one person left in the family who might help. His uncle Steve, Jesse's father's younger brother, a quiet man who had stopped coming around after Jesse's father died, claiming that Karen had changed everything. He was the only adult who had ever spoken to Jesse with gentleness, who once told him during a backyard barbecue, "Don't ever let anyone tell you who to be." "Kid." Jesse called him, told him about the letter, read it word for word. Steve's voice on the other end cracked with something like relief. "Yes," he said. "Your grandfather made that clear in his will. The house was never meant for your mother. She was only the guardian of it until you turned 18. Legally, it belongs to you." The words hit Jesse like thunder. The house was his. The place they kicked him out of, the one Rick tried to erase him from, belonged to him. And they didn't know it yet, but they would. The moment Jesse hung up the phone, the world shifted. What had felt like a dead end just hours before now felt like the first breath after drowning. The house, the one he'd been dragged out of like a stranger, was his, not by chance, not by pity, but because someone had believed in him long before he believed in himself. His grandfather had always been different. He wasn't loud or flashy, and never tried to make Jesse into something he wasn't. When Jesse was small, the old man had spent hours with him in the garage, teaching him to fix radios and old computers, always patient, always listening. Looking back now, Jesse could see it. The quiet glances, the knowing nods, the way his grandfather never flinched when Jesse talked about feeling different. Somehow, without ever saying the word, he had known. And instead of turning away, he had left Jesse something more powerful than acceptance. He had left him a legacy. Jesse shared everything with Ryan that night. The letter, the call with Steve, even the pain of standing at that front door with a suitcase and nowhere to go. Ryan didn't interrupt. He just nodded, that steady presence he'd always been. And for the first time in days, Jesse felt something like control. The next morning, Jesse met Steve in person for the first time in years. He looked older than Jesse remembered, grayer, leaner, but his voice was still warm, still safe. They met at a quiet diner near the courthouse, the kind with chipped mugs and laminated menus. Steve brought a manila folder and a stack of neatly printed documents. "This," he said, sliding a paper across the table, "is your grandfather's will, dated 2 months before he passed." Jesse read each word slowly. The legal phrases were dry, emotionless, but one section stood out in bold clarity. "I bequeath my primary residence at 27 Lambert Avenue to my grandson, Jesse Allen Moore, to be held in trust by his mother, Karen Moore, until his 18th birthday. Upon this date, full ownership is to transfer to Jesse." There it was, in black and white. Proof, Steve sighed. "Your mother never told you, did she?" Jesse shook his head. "She told me I didn't belong." The lawyer Steve had brought, Miss Patel, explained the situation clearly. Karen had been the temporary custodian of the house, but she had no legal right to sell it, rent it, or expel Jesse once he turned 18. Doing so early, by even 1 hour, violated guardianship law, especially if Jesse could prove he was forced out unlawfully while still a minor. "She kicked me out at 10 p.m., Jesse said quietly. "I wasn't legally 18 until 8 the next morning." That detail mattered. It meant that Rick and Karen hadn't just thrown Jesse out of his home. They had potentially committed an act of illegal expulsion against a minor. Worse, They had already started the process of selling the property, claiming it as their own. According to Steve, Rick had even borrowed a large sum of money, $60,000, using the house as collateral. "They're treating your inheritance like a free ride." Steve said, "It's not just wrong, it's criminal." Jesse felt sick. But beneath the nausea was something new: resolve. With Steve's help, they filed for an emergency injunction to block any further financial action involving the house. Miss Patel worked quickly, submitting every record Jesse could provide: school files, text logs, the video Ashley posted, timestamps from phone calls, and of course, the letter from his grandfather. The clip Ashley had gleefully uploaded to TikTok was more than cruel. It was evidence. It showed Jesse standing outside with a duffel bag, the time clearly visible in the metadata, just hours before his 18th birthday. As the legal process began, Jesse stayed quiet publicly. But inside, something started to rebuild. Not rage, not revenge, but the slow return of a boy who had always been made to feel invisible. That boy was watching himself become visible again. In court records, in signatures, in the truth. A week later, they received confirmation the court had granted a temporary freeze on the property. No sale, no loans, no transfer. And Jesse, once the ghost in the house, was now its legal heir. A hearing would determine full control and restitution. Rick and Karen had no idea what was coming. Jesse had debated whether to post anything online, but when he looked at Ashley's video again and read the thousands of comments mocking him, calling him names, laughing at his tears, something shifted. He opened his phone and recorded a single video. No filters, no edits. "I'm Jesse. I was kicked out of my home on my 18th birthday because I'm gay. They thought I had nowhere to go, but what they didn't know is that house, it was mine. My grandfather left it to me before he died. They tried to sell it, live off it, and erase me from it, but they couldn't, because I belonged there more than they ever did." He uploaded it and turned off his phone. By morning, the video had gone viral. Comments poured in from around the world, from people who had been disowned, thrown out, erased by families who couldn't accept them. Jesse's story had become more than personal. It had become a mirror for thousands of others, a reminder that sometimes the people who break you don't get to keep the pieces. But Jesse wasn't done yet. The fight wasn't over. The house was frozen. The truth was out. And Jesse, the boy who once whispered who he was in the dark, was ready to speak it under the sun. Jesse stood once more in front of the house where his life had unraveled. But this time, he wasn't holding a suitcase. He wasn't trembling. He wasn't begging to be let in. This time, he arrived in a clean button-down, holding legal papers, flanked by his Uncle Steve, Attorney Patel, and a local police officer enforcing the court's emergency injunction. The neighborhood looked the same, the bushes still overgrown, the mailbox still crooked, but the energy had changed. Jesse wasn't the boy being dragged out anymore. He was the rightful owner walking in. Karen was the first to open the door. She froze when she saw them. Her face, always so carefully curated with foundation and perfect brows, cracked into something pale and startled. Behind her, Rick appeared, holding a mug of coffee like this was just another lazy afternoon. "What is this?" Rick growled, stepping forward. "Miss," Patel answered calmly, handing him the court documents. "This property is under temporary protection by order of the Superior Court. You are to cease all transactions, vacate any ongoing negotiations, and relinquish control pending final judgment." Rick's lips twisted. "This is my house." "No," she replied without flinching. "It never was." Karen didn't speak. She just stared at Jesse like he was some ghost, a reminder of a truth she had buried years ago. Inside the house, it was clear they'd already begun packing certain items. But what startled Jesse most wasn't the moving boxes. It was the stack of papers on the dining table, documents from a loan agency, detailing a recent loan of $60,000 taken out against the house's value, signed by Rick as property owner. Witnessed by Karen, they had mortgaged what didn't belong to them, trying to sell off his future. The police officer ordered them to leave the documents untouched. The house would be locked and monitored until the hearing. Jesse didn't say anything at first. He just walked through the house, the living room where his grandfather once read him stories, the stairs where Rick pushed him aside, the hallway where Ashley filmed her TikTok. Each corner held memories, some tender, some suffocating. When they left, Miss Patel confirmed what Jesse had feared. Rick and Karen had committed mortgage fraud. By claiming ownership they didn't legally have, they had placed the property and Jesse's inheritance at risk. Charges would follow, civil and potentially criminal. Jesse felt no thrill in hearing it, only a quiet ache, because the truth was, he hadn't wanted to destroy anyone. He had only wanted what was his, a home, a right to exist. The court date came sooner than expected. Jesse wore a borrowed blazer. Steve sat beside him. Across the aisle, Karen looked hollow. Rick still radiated entitlement, but this time, entitlement wasn't enough. The judge read through the documents in silence, then asked Jesse to speak. He stood, cleared his throat. "I was kicked out of my home on my birthday," he said quietly. "But I wasn't legally 18 yet. It was 10 at night. I still had 8 hours to go. I slept on a stranger's couch because my mother and stepfather said I wasn't welcome, because I'm gay." He paused. The courtroom was silent. "This house was a gift from my grandfather," he continued. "He left it to me in his will. He trusted my mother to protect it until I turned 18, but instead, they tried to erase me and sell the only thing I had left of him." He submitted Ashley's video, showing the exact time of his eviction. He submitted the phone call log with Karen, the letter from his grandfather, the will, the mortgage documents signed by Rick. It wasn't emotional, it didn't need to be. It was irrefutable. When the judge issued the ruling, Jesse didn't breathe. Not until the words landed like bricks. Full transfer of property ownership to Jesse Allen Moore. Immediate nullification of the fraudulent mortgage agreement. Karen and Rick were to pay restitution in the amount of $32,000. Income illegally earned from renting out the basement over the last 2 years. Rick was also under investigation for fraud. Karen, while not criminally charged, was held liable for violating her fiduciary duty as Jesse's guardian. They didn't look at him when they left the courtroom. Rick muttered under his breath. Karen stared at her shoes. Outside, a small group of reporters waited. Jesse had said nothing to the press. But somehow, his story had already begun to spread. A boy kicked out for being gay. A house meant to be a home, turned into a battleground. A twist of inheritance no one expected. He didn't smile for the cameras. He didn't pose. He simply walked down the courthouse steps, papers in hand, toward a future no longer decided by someone else. By that evening, Jesse's story was everywhere. The video he had posted days before now carried millions of views. Celebrities retweeted it. Activists reached out. But more than that, messages came from young people around the world. Messages that read, "This gave me hope. I thought I was alone. Thank you for standing up." But Jesse hadn't done it to be a hero. He had done it because no one else would have done it for him. Because he had learned sometimes the people who hurt you also underestimate you. And when they do, you take back everything they tried to steal, not with rage, but with proof. Jesse stood in the hallway of the house he was never supposed to walk through again. The same creaky floorboards, the same faded wallpaper. But now, it didn't suffocate him. It didn't haunt him. It welcomed him. Not because it was warm or easy, but because it was his. The judge's ruling had not only returned the house to its rightful owner, but also forced Karen and Rick to return every dollar they had earned renting out the basement to travelers and tenants over the past 2 years, $32,000. Money they had taken quietly, illegally, now ordered back, down to the last cent. And that was only the beginning. The court also froze the fraudulent mortgage loan Rick had secured under false ownership. Investigators were already moving forward with charges of real estate fraud and financial misrepresentation. For once, the law moved in Jesse's favor, not because he shouted the loudest, but because he had evidence, truth, and the weight of a promise made long ago. Still, the victory wasn't one Jesse celebrated with parties or announcements. He didn't gloat. There was no bitterness left to fuel it, only clarity. This wasn't about punishment. It was about protection, not just for himself, but for others who had been forced to survive in silence. The day he got the keys, the real ones, signed into his name, Jesse walked through each room alone. He placed his hand on the kitchen table where he once did homework while his grandfather brought him cocoa. He lingered in the living room, where he had once curled into the couch during thunderstorms, his grandfather quietly tuning the radio to something calming. Then, in the attic, Jesse found a box he didn't expect. Inside it were photos, black and white prints of his father as a child, notes from Jesse's early birthdays, old tools carefully cleaned and wrapped. But what stopped him was a second letter, tucked beneath the lid, sealed in a yellow envelope identical to the one he had already read. It was addressed simply, "If Jesse ever returns." The handwriting was unmistakable. "My dear boy, if you're reading this, it means you came back. I knew you would. I always believed you'd make it through, even when it felt impossible. You don't have to be someone else to deserve a home. You don't have to earn love by hiding. I've known who you are for years. Jesse, you were never hiding from me. I left you this house not just because it's a roof, but because I wanted you to have one place in this world where no one could throw you out again. Protect it, live in it, or turn it into something better. Just remember, you belong, always. With love, Grandpa." Jesse held the letter against his chest, letting himself cry, not out of pain, but gratitude. That night, he sat down and wrote something he hadn't dared to imagine a few months ago, a plan, not just for himself, but for others. He filed paperwork to create a small nonprofit scholarship in his grandfather's name, dedicated to helping LGBTQ+ youth who had been displaced, disowned, or forced to drop out of school. It wasn't grand, not yet, but it was real. And it was his way of making sure no one else would have to sleep on a stranger's couch just for being honest about who they are. Jesse also decided to rent out the basement again, this time legally, responsibly, offering it at a reduced rate for students or young adults who needed transitional housing. The first tenant was a young trans man studying graphic design who had been couch surfing after his own parents refused to co-sign a lease. Jesse met him at a community shelter meeting and saw in his eyes the same quiet panic Jesse had once carried. The house began to change, not in its structure, but in its spirit. Laughter returned to the kitchen. Music hummed through the walls again. And Jesse, once invisible in his own life, began to see himself clearly. He returned to his university courses in computer engineering, reconnected with friends, rebuilt his routines. And when asked about what happened, he didn't shy away. He told the truth with courage, not shame, not as a victim, but as someone who had survived the kind of silence meant to erase a person. And in the quiet moments, he would sometimes stand at the porch at sunset, watching the golden light fall across the driveway. That was where he'd once stood with a duffel bag and no home. Now, it was where he stood with purpose. The past would always be part of him, but it no longer owned him. He did. And so, the house that once held rejection, betrayal, and pain now held something else entirely healing. Have you ever had to fight for something that was already yours? Share your story in the comments. And don't forget to follow Heart Story for more true stories of resilience, redemption, and reclaiming what matters most.